Hi, folks. We're going to get started in just a minute here. Hi, if you're tuning in, we're going to start in just a couple minutes. Just getting everything ready to go. Folks, if you're tuning in, go ahead and drop a message in chat. Tell us where you're tuning in from. We're going to start in just one more minute here. All right. Hey, everyone, folks, just another 30 seconds and we'll go ahead and get started with this session. We're going to be talking about building developer portals with Backstage. Pretty excited. We've got guests from Spotify on today. Love to see we've got someone tuning in from London. Happy to see that. We usually don't do these morning sessions. Awesome. Love to see we're seeing people tune in. We're going to get started in about 10 seconds here. All right. Hello, everyone. My name is Sai Vennam, and I'm a developer advocate with AWS. Today, I'm excited to have guests on from Spotify, and we're going to be talking about Backstage. Now, Backstage is an open platform for building developer portals, and some of their numbers are just incredible. They went open source with this 2 years ago. I want to share some of the numbers here. They have over 20,000 commits, 10,000 PRs and issues, 15,000 stars on GitHubs, and here's what I think is so cool. This project, in just 2 years, the marketplace has kind of grown up around it so quickly. There's 60 plus open source plugins in the Backstage plugin marketplace. All right, without further ado, let me go ahead and introduce the guests and bring them on stage. I've got my laptop here, so you'll notice me looking here. And be sure to drop any comments in chat as you have any questions, and we'll make sure we get around to those. All right, here we go. Hi, everyone. How are you doing today?
Hello.
Good.
We're fine.
Awesome. Let's go around the circle really quick. Suzanne, maybe we can start with you.
Yeah, so hi, folks. I'm Suzanne Daniels. I'm based out of the Netherlands, and I work for Spotify doing developer relations for a wonderful project called Backstage.
Awesome. Thanks for joining us, Suzanne. Himanshu?
Hey everyone, good morning, good evening, wherever you are. My name is Himanshu. I'm a developer advocate with Spotify working on Backstage. I'm based out of India, so it's quite in the evening for me. And so excited to talk about Backstage with you folks.
Well, we're really glad you're joining us late here. Thank you, Himanshu. And I'm sure we'll make this a great session. And finally, last but not least, Bryan.
Hey everyone, my name is Bryan Landes. I am one of the global solutions architects, and I've been working with the Backstage team for a little bit here, and I'm really excited to have you all here there. So thank you.
Awesome. All right, folks, I think we should go ahead and get started. I gave a very quick intro to what exactly Backstage is, but I'm sure folks are still wondering, what does it mean to help support building developer portals? And I've got to say, the word and term portal, and developer portal especially, is a little overloaded, and it can mean quite a few things. So, Suzanne, I'd maybe like to start with you. I know we've got a kind of structured approach today. What do you kind of see as Backstage in your words?
So, like you mentioned, Backstage is a platform for building your developer portal. Now, indeed, a portal can mean a lot of things. Even a developer portal can mean a lot of things to different people. So when we look at a developer portal, it's basically the place where you go to do three things mainly. It's creating, managing, and exploring. And we'll go dive deeper on that later, probably. We can, well, you have this beautiful board, so I'm sure we can diagram some things to explain more. But in general, it is not to replace your tooling. It is to create that one place where you go to find information and to use that other tooling. It's to aggregate, not to replace.
And I think
and that is the power.
Yeah, and I think this is why developers have flocked so much to Backstage, is that it's this tool that's it's not yet another GitOps tool or automation tool. It's a way to kind of control the chaos, right? And this is something that I've seen quite a bit around the Backstage messaging. Is it's how do you handle the sprawl that occurs as a company begins to grow. And I know that Backstage was developed by Spotify and is now an incubating project in the Cloud Native Computing Foundation. But I'd love to understand a little bit about how did Backstage actually come about, and why is this something that Spotify is developing or had developed?
Yeah, there's a lot being written about Spotify and the engineering culture, but mostly what is really working well is that we have a lot of autonomous teams, and that worked particularly well for Spotify. But well, it's still a technology company, so you get more people who need to onboard. You get a more complex infrastructure. So when you would still be years ago working with monoliths, and you would have certain teams and you would know the teams, then it's not so hard to collaborate. It's not too hard to onboard. It's not too hard to understand each other's technologies. But then over time, there were more teams. The way we built applications changed, moving to microservices. And yeah, as soon as you grow, it's harder and harder to know who's managing what. You have to venture outside of your domain. And that can be particularly, can be very, very frustrating as well. It will slow you down. So at some point when we added engineers, it was just not, we were just not getting more speed.
Yeah, and I think this, sorry, go ahead.
No, so what happened is that, we tried to solve that by creating places where people could find stuff, but it is so hard to manage. Then at some point we built a developer portal internally, like a place where people could find all that information and could see who was running on call. But it was managed by one team, and our company was, hundreds of engineers. So that doesn't work that well. You have to know a lot of domain knowledge to create valuable page for your plugins, a valuable page for your services.
Definitely.
So we struggled a lot with that.
And I think, when I think about Spotify, obviously, yes, it's a tech company. And I remember, I'm thinking even 7-8 years ago, with the agile model really getting more and more popular, people were looking at the Spotify model for structuring teams with tribes and developers. And I think it's really great to see that now, you guys are making ways into affecting developers even to this day with portals like this. I think it's been really cool to see that. I drew a little diagram here that I found, I think it was in your documentation, to show that Backstage really sits at the center of all of this right here, allowing to manage the scale as companies grow, to do so with speed. And I think the critical thing here is managing some of that chaos. Now, I think for folks listening, we've covered a lot of the kind of high level of what Backstage is, why it came about, but something that really helped me understand it was to understand kind of what are the actual use cases for using Backstage. And so I'd love to kind of maybe go around and ask you, what do you see as one really critical use case for using Backstage? And maybe I'll start this off with one of them. And I think it's probably one of the most understandable ones for developers. And it's one of the use cases for Backstage is to create a microservice. And so I think one of the things I saw with Backstage was that it gives you the ability to configure these software templates. And so a developer can just come in and get started very quickly with creating a microservice. Now, I might put you folks on the spot here, but let's go around and let's maybe get 4 use cases here so folks really understand what we're using Backstage for. Himanshu, how about I go to you next and ask you for what is a use case for using Backstage?
Sure. So I think something that I personally am fond of Backstage is that it is my go-to place to discover things, to discover internal APIs, to discover internal data sets, which I can just use and start my research if I'm a data scientist. If I'm a backend developer, like, does APIs exist, and see the documentation right there. So I think Backstage has a great use case for solving the problem of discoverability inside a company.
Awesome. I love it. And folks, we're going to dive into all of these in more depth later. So I'm starting with kind of this approach to lay this the groundwork for what Backstage is. And Himanshu's got a demo for us in a little bit as well that'll let us see exactly how Backstage itself works. Bryan, how about we go to you next? Give me a use case.
Yeah, one of the things I love about Backstage is kind of that end-to-end almost observability into your infrastructure. So you can actually see when you deploy microservices onto Kubernetes or EKS, or actually have any kind of that trace back to any of your infrastructure instead of having to go to multiple tabs or different windows, and you can actually be unified with your teams. That's one of my favorite things about it.
Absolutely. I think, observability being the ability to see the state of a system. And one of the things we're going to show today is the fact that Backstage can really give you that ability to see systems even outside of the context of Backstage. For example, Kubernetes clusters that might be running in a on-premises environment or in the public cloud using something like EKS. That's something we'll dive into here in a little bit as well. All right. I want one more use case here. Suzanne, give me something I can put up here.
Yeah, it's creating stuff which is not necessarily within your domain knowledge. For instance, you have a project and you need a data pipeline for something. It can really help you create that, both understand it, but also create it with software templates.
Okay, yeah, so let's add to just a microservice. We can also do things like creating a data pipeline. I love it.
I guess the 4th one could be technical documentation, or reading stuff about those services which exist inside Backstage.
Yes,
so really,
and
I think the word technical documentation is really important, because we don't want companies to put their HR documentation on Backstage. So it's really developers who want to write docs like code.
When I was looking at some of the demos of Backstage and I started using it myself, the UI, the experience was reminiscent of Spotify itself. I was like, this makes so much sense. You have this plugin based architecture showing you, diving into wherever your microservices, APIs, external services might be. You have this UI experience on the left side that's handled by Backstage. And I think this architecture makes so much sense. I'd love to dive into it a little bit, because I think where users derive so much value out of Backstage is using these plugins. Backstage itself is great, but until you start connecting it up to some of these backend sources of data, you're not really deriving the true value of the platform. And of course, whether you're pulling data out of the back end of some other service, or even building it directly into the platform with things like the technical docs, I think I'd love to kind of dive into what that plugin architecture itself looks like. So maybe we can start with that. Himanshu, maybe can you help me kind of diagram this out? I think one of the first components here, obviously, we'll start with an end user that's going to be coming in. And what is the first kind of component that they hit?
they open the website. Backstage is a website overall. It's not a phone app. It's not a desktop app. They go to their browser and then they open backstage.mycompany.net.
All right.
So they'll hit a UI.
All right, so they hit the UI, and maybe I should draw this as a slightly bigger box here. And I'd love to kind of talk about some of these plugins. So now there's plugins like technical docs. Now, do you think that's a good one to start with to kind of show how this would be structured?
I think it's a little complicated one. So let's take a simpler use case. Maybe they want to understand what technologies exist in their company and what technologies they are allowed to use or not allowed to use. So there's a plugin called Tech Radar. I think it's much more popular than Backstage plugin itself. So maybe just a simple plugin, like a web page. They open Backstage and there's this thing in the sidebar. They see something, and they close the service.
Okay, so Tech Radar, this is a plugin that's it's static, right? It's like built into Backstage itself. You don't need to configure some backend service or proxy. You're just programming it directly into Backstage, right?
Yes, maybe updating a few YAMLs because we love YAMLs, and the easiest way to configure plugins is by adding things in app-config YAML that exists in Backstage. But overall, it's static. It's a few React code, a few components in there. That's it.
Awesome. All right, let's take it a step further, and let's talk about a plugin that does need to store some data. Something needs to be stored somewhere in a stateful way. And I think maybe tech docs could be a good one here to talk about. Well, I'll leave it to you. What do you think is a good kind of step up here?
Yeah, so I think after tech docs, we'll take Kubernetes. I think it's different from tech docs. So tech docs plugin inside Backstage is the whole deal. It has a front end where you can read documentation. But it's not just like the simple reading experience. There's lots of smaller add-ons on top of tech docs, so you can actually highlight things and report outdated documentation. There's a button if you need to update documentation right then and there, like edit this page. You can see who edited those docs. There's a lot of features built on top of that front-end plugin, but it has a backend plugin counterpart which lives inside Backstage.
Got it. So we want to make sure we get that represented. We'll say very simply, just say backend. You know, one of the things I saw really interesting here was that plugins can work together. So I looked in the marketplace and I saw, for example, Stack Overflow. Feasibly, could someone kind of integrate Stack Overflow posts with the documentation to kind of have this like live Stack Overflow view of questions that are related to the documentation in some way?
Already done inside Spotify. We have Stack Overflow Enterprise. It's integrated in documentation, in search. So yeah, that's the power of like these platforms, that you don't get something out of the box and you don't have power to update them. You have the power to like add on things to them, customize them. Backstage has a lot of customizability. I'll talk about it in my demo as well.
Very cool.
So, yeah, Tech Docs, it has a backend. So a lot of powerful Backstage plugins have a backend. So you get like a server. It's in Node.js. You can run tasks, or you can like store secrets, whatever you need. Plus, it's also the best way to connect to a database, which Tech Docs needs, because you want to compile the documentation and store them, and so that it loads faster and such. There's a lot of things in between. There's a cache, but this is the simplest, I would say, the most advanced Backstage plugin. It has a front end. It has a back end to do things like it runs some Python scripts to compile documentation. It uses the mkdocs container. It runs it one-off whenever there's a change in documentation, and then it publishes back in database. And whenever someone reads documentation, it fetches it for the user. Got it.
Okay, one more component that I want to talk about here, a little selfishly, because containers from the couch here. We want to talk about how users can manage their containers, their workloads, especially when they're running in Kubernetes. So I know Backstage itself supports a plugin for working with Kubernetes environments. So I've left some space here. Let's talk about that last. How does the Kubernetes component itself work?
Sure. So I think we'll be introducing a new concept, which is called a Backstage proxy. It's that when you already have a backend, Kubernetes is great because it supports a world-class API to get data about your, things that you have deployed, all your deployments, pods, and such. So we don't need to rewrite all those things in a new backend plugin. All we need to do is forward some of those API requests from the front end or Backstage to the actual Kubernetes cluster. So to do that securely, we use something called Backstage proxy. I'll show you in my demo. You just add a few routes, make sure the authentication is set up, and then you just focus on your front end. So for the Backstage Kubernetes plugin, you just look at what's being deployed and what's new and such. And it's communicating to the actual cluster, EKS in this example, via the Backstage proxy. It's very thin, lightweight.
So the reason we got to go through a proxy here is because this is like a front end component, right? And so to be able to communicate with external resources, you're going to run into CORS issues, cross-origin request headers. So by leveraging a proxy component within Backstage, you're able to route that information in a secure way, essentially, being able to pull that information and kind of displayed in the UI. I thought that was an interesting attention to detail here to make sure that these components work as expected. Okay, so before we go ahead.
To add to this, this is basically what is the success. So like I explained in my little introduction, is that when you build a developer portal with one team for an entire company with a lot of different technologies and a lot of domains, this is actually the way to do it in a better way and to make it scalable, because Backstage is built off these plugins. So Backstage would be like the Lego base plate on which you place the blocks. And if you have specific domain knowledge, then you would create a plugin and you would own that plugin and expose it for others to use as well.
Right. So for example, when we look at the plugin marketplace here today, we've just covered a few of the plugins here, the Kubernetes plugin, TechDocs, TechRadar. But for example, there's other plugins to manage your resources wherever they might be. For example, maybe you have an Argo CD pipeline. That would be an external source. Maybe we talked about Stack Overflow. That would be another interesting way to bring things in. Amazon Lambda functions. I saw there was another plugin in the marketplace for that, to be able to get introspection into those environments as well. And so I think a lot of what we've talked about, at least with this specific example with Kubernetes, was the way to observe and see the state of tools that you may be running. But I think one thing we haven't talked about enough here is that create aspect. Where does that fit into this flow? I mean, how are we creating actual experiences for developers with Backstage?
Sure. So I think it's much closer to the TechDocs example. Is that you have a plugin which has a great backend. I think it's one of the core features of Backstage. And then you have software templates. I think if I have like a demo, if I can show some YAML, some templates, I think it'll be easier to understand. But you fill in some forms. It's on the front end. You fill in some details. What do you want to create? Do you want to create a Python library or a microservice or a data pipeline or a new AWS project? Who knows? Or a new Google Cloud project, like all kinds of things. That's why I think Suzanne focused on creating and not creating a microservice, because you can literally create anything. Fill in some details. It gets passed on to the backend, software templates backend. It runs some actions based on those details, and those can fully be customized, written by the organization. And it can maybe create a new repository for you. It can create new resources, maybe cloud resources for you if you need them. It can trigger some pipelines if you are creating a new service. So imagine like creating a new service in a large organization. You have to take care of all kinds of things like security, monitoring, like configuring those kind of things. You shouldn't have to tap shoulders if you want to create stuff. It should be done for you so that you can go ahead and write your business logic as a developer. So yeah, that's how it fits into Backstage.
Got it. And I think that's the perfect segue here to your demo, because I think there's too many components here for me to draw out to explain the real power of it. Let's see exactly how it works. So Himanshu, I'll ask you to share your screen here, and we'll jump into a full-on demo. But sorry, Bryan, did I cut you off there?
No, it's okay. And Himanshu, go ahead and bring up your screen while I kind of chat. But I was just going to say, this is one of my favorite parts about Backstage is really powering that platform engineering team and giving them all the tools that they could possibly use to build for their organization. Every organization or developer, when they work, is very different from one another, and you can really kind of customize this entire experience. And we also see a lot of customers build their own private plugins, right? That may not be on the marketplace, and it's very suited just for the organization. So I do love the idea of really powering the platform engineering team, putting in the guardrails, putting in networking to really help accelerate that developer experience.
Yeah,
absolutely.
So at Spotify, we have created over 100 plugins, which we use inside of Backstage. And the team managing Backstage is actually really, really small. It's a few people. So that is the power, and we see that with a lot of other adopters as well. Some get open sourced. We hope most will over time, but yeah, it's basically the power of using this platform to build your developer portal.
And I have one follow-up question while we wait for the share screen. So you say at Spotify that you have a centralized platform engineering team. Who is helping make the plugins, and who owns the plugins? Is it both teams that might be able to own the plugins? I'm just kind of curious how that kind of setup is, if in your opinion.
So in the end, always one team is responsible for creating and maintaining their plugin. We have a lively community helping each other out and sharing knowledge. Actually, that is the part which is always the hardest work, is creating your community and keeping your community together. So we are investing in that to improve the experience for everybody.
Yeah, I think this is critically one of those things that this platform can be solid and you can have this amazing approach to handling these things, but until you have developers within your company actually adopting technologies, that's what ends up being one of those strong bottlenecks for adoption and growth within a company. And I think Backstage, you will need a central team to manage it, and you will need to do some internal evangelism. But I think what I'm seeing is that the tools are made available to you, so you can set up those kinds of approaches. All right, and with that, let's jump to the demo here. Himanshu, I think you've got your screen loaded up here. Let's see it.
I have. So I like to get into my VS Code whenever I have to show things, no slides, show things as they are live. So this is a Backstage instance, folks, and I'm going to cover the things we have discussed, but maybe also show you new plugins and new possibilities on a developer portal, which you can use as an inspiration. So by the way, if you see something called Rocket, that's the creation of Suzanne. It's a company founded on Mars, which supports interplanetary travel, and they use Backstage. And one of the things which I, as a new engineer in Rocket, supposed to do is work on their lunch app. It's a very critical app which customers or riders, travelers will use to order lunches. So I joined this company, and one of the things they tell me is that you have to go through this golden path concept. So as you're a backend engineer, you have to follow the golden path, and it will take you through everything, all the steps needed to create a new backend service on your own. You don't have to ask anyone anything. You don't have to be blogged. You go ahead and start working. And I think this helps us. So Spotify measures, one of the metric it tracks for the success of Backstage is how much time it takes for a new developer to create their 10th pull request, and concepts like golden path and reading documentation and discovering things, I think has added to that. So I read this documentation, and it tells me, go to this create page and fill in some details, and things should be done for you automatically. I'm amazed. So what is this create thing? So yeah, that's the software templates part. Is that my company already has decided on some of the technologies which should be used to create new things. And I think it's one of the things which large companies have to do to avoid fragmentation within their own company so that there's easier collaboration across teams. If one team is using JavaScript, other team is using Ruby on Rails, third team is using in Python, and you got 10 technologies inside your own company, there are going to be some problems. So software templates actually help you standardize that and make sure you, first of all, make it easier for developers to create stuff, but also give them some standards. So for example, I want to create a new website. So yeah, this is the template which I choose. It's asking me some details. So for example, I'm going to say, this is my new awesome website. And of course, I'll be lazy and copy the same thing in my description. I'm part of the travel experience team, guys, because I'm creating the lunch apps. It's part of the experience. So I'll choose where it's supposed to be hosted. My company is huge. They use GitHub, GitLab, and GHE as well. So let me just choose that. And should I be creating this in my own personal account, or should I be creating it under an organization? So let's go ahead and choose an organization, and let me make sure I fill in the name of the repository. And since I create so many awesome websites, I always suffix it with the date. But the limits are endless here. Everything that you want your engineers to fill in before they create stuff, you can add it as part of the software template. Do you need a check like, does your service handle private personal identifier information? Maybe there should be additional checks in there. Maybe you want to create a Jira ticket. We saw a demo from Deutsche Bank in the last Backstage community sessions. They create a Jira ticket for things that fail to work. Maybe you want to spin up some bots to do stuff, like all kinds of steps that you want. You can embed it as part of the template. While this is happening, I'll show you how an actual template looks like. And I have it open right here. So yeah, it's done. So everything you see here in the left is a step that happens as part of the template. And there you go. So in this template, you have 3 steps. Basically, you fetch a skeleton, basically the template, with some code in there. Some of the things are going to be supposed to be filled by the details that I have written in the forms. And then you basically create a new repository, and then you register it back in software catalog, which I'm going to show you in a second. But you can add all kinds of actions in here, create a new AWS bucket, S3 bucket, put up a message on Slack. The sky's the limit, as I said. So the repository is there. And I, as a developer, didn't have to do anything. I'll just go ahead and start writing my React code, to be honest. So I'll start here. I don't care like if the company uses Grafana to like look at some graphs, it's already there. All the headache is being taken care for me. And it gets registered back in software catalog, which is the second huge part of Backstage. And one of the core features of Backstage is that you can see the service and like all kinds of entities, as they're called in Backstage, websites, users, APIs. I'll show you everything. But yeah, every entity has an entity page. It looks slightly different for each entity. And if you own the service, you might be coming here to see some of the things. But if you're just looking around in your company trying to find some of the existing services that you can consume, you might be exploring some other tabs and such. So, by the way, folks, if you have questions, feel free to stop me and ask me to, like, Suzanne, stop me and ask me to like switch tabs and such. So this is what, go ahead.
No, maybe you can show the YAML.
Yeah,
Because
absolutely.
What makes this entity page? What is an
Absolutely.
entity?
Absolutely. So we'll do that. And this is I would like to call it the home page of a service. So every entity has this home entity page. There's a bunch of cards in here, as you can see. So the first bit is the about card. You come to the service, you see what the service is all about, who owns this service, what's the life cycle, is it in production, is it experimental, what system does it belong to, and like, of course, you can just start looking into documentation and such. But where is this all data coming from? Is this all stored inside Backstage? No. So Backstage follows this GitOps model where it aggregates information rather than storing a lot of information. So whenever you create a new service, all the metadata is stored alongside the service itself in the repository itself. So here's an example of that YAML file. Backstage has a few YAML files. So this one is generally called catalog info YAML file, which contains some metadata about the service which catalog consumes, like the name of the service and the description and like some of the metadata, like what it is, who owns the service and such.
So Himanshu, this looks a whole lot like Kubernetes manifest
I know, we just
YAML.
copied it.
So speak a little bit about that. Was it inspired by it? Is this running, at some point, do you expect customers to run this in Kubernetes, or is it really just the kind of format that you took?
I think it's just familiar. That's why we didn't want to create new terms. So, for example, API version, kind, these are all inspired by Kubernetes. It doesn't have to do anything with Kubernetes, though. Even in Backstage, there's a triplet, which identifies a unique resource, which is a combination of the kind, the name, and the namespace, which is missing here. So it's by default, same as Kubernetes. So it's inspired a whole lot by Kubernetes.
No, I love to see that. It's at least it's familiar, right? So I look at this and I know exactly where to look, and I'm like, oh, I know where the annotations will be, the description. I know where to specify configuration variables, that kind of thing. I know to look for the spec. I think it makes a lot of sense.
Absolutely. Yeah, and the beautiful graph, it pulls also from the file, so it pulls from the depends on, for instance.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And if you want to understand more about this YAML file and how it works and what are the fields that are supported, this is the exact documentation page you should be looking at, called the YAML file format. But yeah, as Suzanne is saying, the graph that you can see here, so this is a service which consumes some APIs, as you can see here, called flight info, because it wants to know who are the travelers in the flight. But it's also owned by some group, and it belongs to a system. System can be treated as part of larger departments inside companies. And you can expand this graph basically to look at your entire company and how services depend on each other, and where do services live, and who owns them, and what APIs they consume. Or if you're looking at APIs, what services consumes them, so that if you're changing something, maybe you want to notify those services and such. And all of this data is literally coming from here. This depends on, if you're creating a service and if you're consuming something, just write it. This in turn, go ahead.
Sorry, I was just going to say, when you were showing that other page with the app itself, the service, one of the things that came to mind was that, this entire experience in UI seems to be focused on, the developer experience of looking at it by the service and the running services, and even the flow chart you showed is services depending on each other. Whereas, I've seen, different tools have different views. Argo CD is focused on things like pipelines and that kind of thing. And I'd love to kind of hear you talk about that a little bit more, the views that Backstage focuses on. I think it's very much in line with the type of users that they expect to be using it.
Yeah, I'll also let Suzanne answer. So in my understanding, Backstage is nothing. It's just a single pane of glass. It's just for you to not worry about things, for you to get your work done by just looking at one place. So that's why it focuses a lot on like the user experience, their journey. What are some of the important things they should be like looking at? That's why you configure the homepage according to them. Like if developers don't want to look at this graph, remove it. It's like totally up to you. Maybe they just want to look at the documentation, add it in the homepage. All these tabs, as you see, all these cards, as you see, it's all customizable depending on whatever developers want to see.
Right. So one of the things I looked into when I was first, looking into Backstage was, can I use this thing to make like a Kubernetes cluster? Can I use this to spin up some backend, some operational stuff? And I quickly realized that's not what Backstage is here for. And we even got a question in chat asking, how does the Backstage platform, how is it used for data science application-wise? And if I had to answer this question, I'd say it's probably from a perspective of being able to see how your machine training models are actually executing. Not so much to actually use the platform to run models per training, right?
Most likely not. Most likely you will have a plugin visualizing the status of things, visualizing the results. You would have to figure out like what brings the most value to my developer, the person, the engineer looking at this portal. So each of these tiles is a plugin. So if you scroll down, you would like want to know who's on call or would like to create an incident. Then as an example for this service, there's the PagerDuty plugin somewhere down below. If you can go back. Yeah, thank you. So this is the PagerDuty plugin, but this could also be maybe something related to your service, something else. But yeah, so we're going to create an incident. This is all fully customizable, and it's TypeScript, so you can put in if statements. You can let it depend on the information the entity has. You can really make this a pleasant experience for your developer, and everything that creates friction or creates confusion, you just like try to yank that out.
Yeah, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm betting you could probably make a software catalog item for, say, for example, ML models or anything that's already been kind of gone through a pipeline, or maybe even a SQL workbench where they can maybe run queries directly from the developer experience. Have you ever seen anything like that before?
I think Spotify is a data giant. As you can probably imagine, it does a lot of things with data, and of course, Backstage helps a lot in data science. So imagine, like, as a data scientist, you might be wondering in BigQuery and looking into data sets and trying to understand can I trust this data? Should I base my new feature idea as a product manager? Should I base my new feature idea on this data? Is it accurate? Is it outdated? Who owns this? So Spotify has had all these problems, and they use Backstage to like solve them. Like they give tiers to those data sets. Some of the data sets are called golden data sets, and you're supposed to use them like request access if they're private data right from Backstage. Look at pipelines that are running, configure them, change their schedule, like run them daily, hourly, like everything from Backstage. So yeah, it's another aspect of using Backstage.
Very cool. Himanshu, I'd love to see the rest of your demo.
Yes, I'll just continue. As I was showing, like this is what catalog looks like, and all of these cards you see come from plugin. So this PagerDuty card is used to handle incidents. You notice something is not working in a service. You open that service in Backstage and do something right here and here. If over the course of night, if my company decides to stop using PagerDuty and starts using something else, our engineers don't have to learn new interfaces. It should be like a simple button, like where they do everything else. I think this is one of the points, as you have like hundreds of things to do one thing, like monitoring, security checks, CI/CD. There's so many tools available, and developers should not have to like learn each one of them. I think that's the idea of Backstage here. So yeah, I opened the service, but so plugins create these cards, but some of the plugins are huge in itself, like a CI/CD plugin for Backstage, and Backstage supports all kinds of CI/CD services, so I won't name one. But this one is coming from GitHub Actions, and I just look at all the logs from here. I just come here, see my latest build, what's working, what's not, maybe look at some of the detailed logs from here, and I don't have to go to their website. Of course, you're not supposed to like recreate a service on Backstage as a plugin when you're building the plugin. So you should have to make a balance between what's useful for developers, and whenever they want to actually go to that actual service, they can of course click a button and then go to the actual service. I think that's the general philosophy of all Backstage plugins. You're not supposed to like replicate all of them. But I'll also show you some of the fun plugins here. So one of the plugins which exists inside Backstage is called To-Do plugin. So let's say I'm an engineer. I'm just looking around. I found this lunch app thing. I'm a really fan of this team, by the way. I really want to work with them. They pay a little more as well. But no. So I found this To-Do tab where it pulls all the to-dos that exist inside the code and shows them to me. And it's like a way of doing inner sourcing, like you're creating some projects in here for new developers to come and maybe contribute to you. So that's just an example of the possibility of having an entity page or having a catalog page, is that you can start doing things on top of it related to your services. But while I'm talking about inner sourcing, I'll showcase you one of the community plugins which a couple of students actually created. Backstage community is huge. There's over thousands of contributors and 10 contributors joining in every week. So that's one of the plugins called Bazaar. Maybe Suzanne loves this plugin. Maybe you'd like to talk about it.
Yeah, so a good example for inner sourcing is that you need help because you need specific knowledge, and well, probably somebody in your whole company, in this case, would know CSS and would like to admit it. Who knows? So in this case, people owning the marketing website posted a request seeking help for their marketing mini site. So I found that card on the Bazaar or within the entity page itself. And I can take a little look at the description. Well, what is this help that they need? How much help might it be? Medium, long, short? That sort of descriptions. I can try and join this one. And when I join, I can also reach out to the Slack community. So if I would click the link, I would go to the Slack channel, which we of course haven't configured, because otherwise smart people will join our private Slack channels, which is maybe not that good. But yeah, this is how I can start my collaboration. Most likely I will check out this project. So I will take a look at who owns this, what is it. I would go up, maybe also look at how the pipelines are doing here. Maybe there's some information, code insights, like discovering the documentation. These are all things I could look at. As you noticed, this is not GitHub, this is GitLab actually, because like many other companies, we use different technologies in different parts of the company, but we chose to display on the same spot the same kind of information. Why? It is super confusing if you have to go to that other tab, or if it's named differently, or not in the place where you would expect it. So yeah, this is their project. I can browse their source code because, of course, that's also linked, and so on. So I can make an informed decision if I could embed in this project and help them.
You know, I love this concept of inner sourcing and the fact that you're applying these open source development strategies to, you know, potentially proprietary or internal code. And I think one of the things we always battle with as companies grow larger is people duplicating work, not being able to find documentation for something, asking, hey, how did we implement that API again? And you end up having this sprawl of how do we get folks on the same page? And we actually got a couple of questions related to this in the chat here. So one of them was, if I wanted to introduce Backstage into my company, how could I do it? And another very similar question I want to make sure I mention here as well is, David is really interested in more information on how Backstage benefits different cylinders of excellence at larger enterprises. I think these kind of questions go hand in hand, and I'll pass it to any of you here for how does Backstage and this concept of inner sourcing and all of the things we've talked about, how can people actually implement this?
Not by doing everything at once and trying to solve everything at once. I think that's the most important takeaway. Yeah, you have to start small, like many things in life. Find a group of enthusiastic people that could be a center or cylinder of excellence. Could be maybe that you have a developer experience organization, but somebody who cares about the developer experience and wants to improve that. Then the thing is to find one thing to start with and just do that right and use that knowledge to share and to expand your community. That would be basically the way to get started.
And building on that, and Himanshu, I see you're sharing some resources here. I would love to kind of share these as well. So if you drop a link to me, I'll make sure that we share it with our audience here as well. I want to make sure that they have access to these resources. Now, one of the things I want to talk about, Backstage, is open source. And feasibly, it's free, and anyone can begin to use it. But for a lot of companies, they don't want even the overhead of managing Backstage itself. Has Spotify considered how SaaS-based offerings might be built from Backstage, of managing Backstage itself as a service for companies that maybe want to offload the management of Backstage itself?
So we have thought about it, but we decided that we rather invest in engineering Backstage, basically. So Backstage, like you said, is open source. It's a CNCF project, and luckily people are able to build a valid and successful business around it. So there's some partners here at the bottom of the site. For instance, Rody offers managed Backstage as a service. So that would be an example of how you could offer this service to other companies or use the service.
Definitely. We have one more question here from Carlos here, asking how much the number of community shared extensions and components have grown in the past few months. And I shared a few numbers in the very beginning, and today we're seeing 15,000 plus stars on GitHub, 60 plus open source plugins. But Backstage, new to CNCF, is an incubating project, has only been open source for about 2 years. What are we seeing out there as far as the growth in the project, the development? I feel like it's been fairly exciting, and I see Himanshu showing the marketplace itself right now.
Yeah. So Backstage is basically like connects to your existing services, and as I said, there's hundreds of existing technologies to do like one thing. So naturally, there will be like plugins for integrations with like individual CI/CD providers, individual like monitoring providers, etc. But I think one of the things that excite me personally about this plugin space in Backstage is that you can create a plugin in like 2 hours just to show something, but then you can spend like 1 year and build a gigantic software catalog plugin. So yeah, it's a platform, and I think people love like reusing things, like reusing components, reusing like existing libraries, and like within like basically, I think Suzanne has an idea of like you have a box of Legos and you want to build something. But yeah, plugins are those, like you build something and then you have this Backstage instance, which basically solves all the problems that exist in your org one by one, not thing at all.
Awesome.
Yeah,
and so
in terms of growth, like I can remember at the beginning of the year we were like around 100, 110 adopters. I think it's now even more going towards 180 already. So it shows like the momentum around this project. And for each company adopting, they one way or another invest in this project as well. So it is good to know that it is backed by a lot of companies.
Definitely. All right, folks, we have about 4 minutes left here. If you have any more questions, be sure to drop them in the chat. This is your chance to ask folks directly from Spotify, myself and Bryan, as well as Suzanne and Himanshu, obviously our guests from Spotify here. Any questions that you might have about Backstage itself. Now, real quickly, before we let go here, I want to go around the room one more time and ask each of you one last thing of how you would help people get started with Backstage today. Anything that you want to leave with, final comments, how folks can get in touch with the Backstage team potentially. You have things like office hours. I want to make sure you have a chance here so people can get in touch and learn more about the project moving forward, get involved, contribute, that kind of thing. So Himanshu, I'll start with you.
Sure, and there's a handy short URL. Suzanne, if you can paste it in the chat, which has like all the resources of those. But as Suzanne said, start simple. Backstage offers solutions to a lot of problems. If you have a problem of discoverability inside your org, people can't find things, you can solve that with Backstage. If you have the problem of fragmentation where everyone is doing the things on their own and you want to standardize it, Backstage can help you with that. Or if you just need a developer portal, like a front-end website where you can integrate a bunch of things, people can go to read documentation, Backstage can help you with that. But don't be overwhelmed by trying to adopt all things at once. Find one plugin, find let's say just software templates, understand, read about it. There's if you follow this link, you'll end up on the docs either or Backstage. We at Spotify have created tutorials to help you understand these plugins and how you can use them, install them, try it out locally as well. Backstage has a wonderful support for if you just have your laptop, you can run it on your laptop, and you can start experimenting with things, write some YAML files here and there. We have a Discord group. It has over 6,000 members. If you join now, there's 500 people online. Ask questions. There's a lot of people trying to help you out. Of course, on GitHub, we get about 150 issues and pull requests every week. So you can imagine how many people look at it. It's a hugely active community. So you will find all the support you would want in this journey. Spotify has got you covered. If you go to backstage.spotify.com, we have our office hours, which you can join and learn more about the project. But yeah, we hang out in Discord, on GitHub. We have community sessions monthly, twice monthly. You can join, learn about what other adopters are doing in the project. So yeah, Suzanne, anything to add?
Yes, and there's, as part of the KubeCon and Cloud Native Con families of events, there's also a Backstage Con, which is our first conference, which is pretty exciting, and I think it will be a good one. So yeah, you can join that as well. I'm pretty sure Himanshu will paste the link in the chat, and we'll make sure that it's out there. But you can still register. I think there's tickets, some tickets available, and yeah, we of course hope to see you there. And don't be shy. Just book an office hour with us if you're interested. Take it for a spin. We'll take you 20 minutes, and you'll learn a lot and have even more questions probably when you're gone. When you're done, but yeah, it's a great experience, I think, to at least get started using the content on backstage.spotify.com.
Right, I saw that you folks had a Backstage Con, a day zero event at KubeCon. I think that just shows the amount of interest, the amount of sessions that have been submitted. That's really inspiring to see how fast the project is growing. Okay, finally, Bryan, any comments that you want to add here? I know that you are a dedicated SA working with Backstage here at AWS, and so it's critical to our customers as well, and I'd love for you to share how Backstage has kind of impacted customers you may be working with and how it's integrating with AWS.
Yeah, absolutely. And I just want to say thank you all for joining us today from Backstage. It is absolutely wonderful working with you all. And so for folks on the line, Yeah, we're actually working backwards from our customers all the time and actually receiving feedback on what plugins that we should be building. In fact, recently we released AWS Proton and AWS Code Suite integrations with Backstage. So we're always looking for feedback. And also we are working with customers to help kind of start building out these developer experiences with their platform engineering team, kind of to what Suzanne was talking about earlier. So sometimes we help out with POCs and whatever have you, but nevertheless, we're here to receive feedback on any ways that we can help assist our customers. And please reach out to myself, Himanshu, or Suzanne, and we can all coordinate. So, yeah.
All right. And with that, we're at the end of our time here. Thank you so much for tuning in to this episode of Across the Board. It's me, your host, Sai Vennam. I was joined by these awesome guests from Spotify that gave us their time today to talk a little bit about Backstage and some of the crazy things that people are doing out there, some of the awesome capabilities for being able to build developer portals with an open platform. Thanks to you, Bryan, for joining us today. And with that, be sure to subscribe and stay tuned for more episodes of Across the Board in the future. And thanks for joining us.
See you around. Bye.
Bye, folks.